Hello, welcome to the Outcast. Today's guest is my friend and mentor, Kyle Snodgrass, and today we discuss purity and entertainment as consumers, the free will and determinism arguments, as well as much more. Hope you enjoy.
Did you ever listen to the Two Steps from Hell guys? Did you ever hear that artist?
No.
They made like a bunch of trailer music way back in the day. Like their stuff was featured on like Narnia and I want to say 300 or something else like that.
Oh, no way. I still haven't seen 300.
You haven't?
No.
I don't love it.
Really?
It's a little overly, what's the right word?
Graphic?
Well, yeah, there's that. But it's also just like very cartoony.
Well, yeah, it's
Which I'm
meant
not.
to be the adaptation of the graphic novel.
Right. But I don't love, because it's Zack Snyder, right? Who made it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like very into this cartoony style or stylistic filmmaking
he's
that I'm
definitely
not
very stylistic.
I'm not a huge fan of. Like it's okay in pieces, I guess, but
Yeah, you're not fully into like a full movie of it.
yeah.
Yeah, like we were talking a little bit before about the Hobbit, and it's so funny because I know Peter Jackson, he was kind of trying to do, or he was trying to lean into almost like a paradigm shift that he wanted to make of a shifting almost the industry towards a 48 frames per second instead of 24 frames per second.
Was it 48 or 60?
I
But
thought
yeah,
it was
okay,
48,
yeah.
but
yeah.
essentially it was just a higher frame rate.
Yeah.
And so everything, you lose the motion blur for one, but also just the general
But it
aesthetic.
looks fake.
Yeah.
Like there's something about like the flaws behind a camera, like the lens flare is a perfect example. Our eyes don't pick up on that generally, but it's a great little like
It's a cue that we've become accustomed to.
right, and it's a flaw, for lack of a better term, within a camera lens that looks good, and people have made it to show up really well in different movies.
Yeah,
Some people more than others, like J.J. Abrams. Which I don't really understand, like the controversy around that in Star Trek. I really liked all the lens flares. It was a little overdone at times, but for the most part, I kind of liked it in Star Trek.
It was definitely like, it's the new aesthetic, and it's the new, I guess, it's definitely very artificial and otherworldly, which is kind of fun.
Right.
And I think that fits the Star Trek vibe a bit more.
Yeah. It was cool. I liked it.
I think the only Star Trek movie I've ever seen is Into Darkness.
Really? You didn't
Yeah.
see the one before that?
No.
Oh, dude. Okay. I mean, I think Into Darkness was probably the best of the new three.
Yeah.
Like the newer remakes.
Yeah.
I really didn't like the last one, Star Trek Beyond.
Yeah, I think
That
my
was kind
little
of
brother
dumb.
saw it and was like, nope. I've never been a huge Trekkie.
Yeah. Neither have I really. I've only seen like 2 or 3 of the old ones, and I saw all the new ones because they're way better done.
Yeah. It is funny, the quality of. I feel like modern Hollywood has switched from the aesthetics are much better. The production of the product is much better done, but the quality of the stories themselves are worse.
For sure. Yeah.
So like aesthetically, everything looks way better than they did 20, 30 years ago. But in terms of the actual quality of the
Not always though. Like there's some
true.
movies that just overdo the CGI. I don't know.
Or I'm thinking in terms of just the general perfection of each image.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're getting at, but like take the new Star Wars movies. Like they probably look slightly like the lightsabers. Would it make sense that your mic stand is not
Yeah,
liking you?
it's not liking me at all. I'm just holding it. It's fine.
um yeah, like the lightsabers, like the way Kylo Ren's is like kind of like
It
almost
crackles.
almost like, yeah, it crackles, but it's almost like flames in a way.
Yeah.
Like sure, that probably makes some sense, and probably like visually, is more, I don't know, scientific for lack of a better word.
Well, I think
But
I know the lore reason for that is that he has a fractured crystal, and so it's like unstable.
okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It wasn't like a
That wasn't clear to me watching the movie,
no.
but
Yeah. It's all the fact that like the Star Wars lore is everyone or everything in Star Wars has been explained to the utmost like precision and or not precision but depth, and so like every little character has their own backstory, and it's
yeah,
like there was some
it's so much better when it was just like, here's the original and here's the prequels. Just leave it at that, with one exception. Rogue One can still
yeah
exist.
Rogue One makes
All
sense.
the new ones, I just pretend they
I
don't
will
exist.
say Solo gets such a bad rap.
Solo was pretty good too. I did like that. I kind of wish they went with a different actor, but um, and I didn't love the whole like, spoiler alert, the Darth Maul thing at the end.
Really?
I wasn't a huge fan.
It definitely
because
felt very
here's the thing.
tacked on.
Yeah, here's the thing. Like movies these days, look, when you kill off a character, they should be dead. There's so
Yeah.
much of this like bringing characters back for the fan service or whatever. It just gets old, and then people kind of expect that not everyone. You break basically fundamental rules. Like
Yeah.
it's like if gravity didn't exist, it's like, oh well, okay, gravity doesn't exist apparently.
Yeah.
Death is not a thing. Okay, well I guess everyone comes back to life at some point. You know, it's okay if it happens once. Like Jesus.
Hey.
or Lazarus.
He's coming back once more, but
yeah, no, he's coming back again. But yeah, just like the Avengers, I feel like took it pretty far. It's the same thing. Like everyone wants Iron Man back. I'm like, no, like it's okay the way it is. Just leave it where it is.
have you seen the whole Robert Downey Jr. coming back as Doctor Doom?
I have. I'm not. So here's the thing. Who was I just talking about this the other day? Ever since Avengers Endgame, I've pretty much just not watched any of the Marvel stuff, with some exceptions. Like I think I've seen some of the Spider-Man movies. The second Doctor Strange, I saw it and then regretted it. And I think after that, I was like, yeah, it's not worth watching all the other spin-offs. So I've just gotten kind of over it.
Yeah.
It was fun while it lasted. Now it's overdone.
Yeah.
Same thing with Star Wars. Lord of the Rings, pretty much the same thing. So
Yeah.
just keep the classics, man. Keep the classics.
It's all the moment you differ from the source material and you try and usurp your own ideas over the source material, and or you try and like, I can't remember who made this comment, but it's so true. Of the moment things become self-reflective, that's the moment that they lose their. That's the moment when the product starts to go downhill, and so
it's an interesting take.
Or like the moment art becomes self-reflective, that's the moment, and like self-critiquing, that's the moment when it starts to lose its weight and lose its I guess, what do you call, meaning and depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because like with the original trilogy of Star Wars, there was it had a self-contained story that had such and such impact, and it had a very specific message that it was trying to tell, and that was very in tune with both mythology and religion that's spanned back for hundreds and thousands of years. Not hundreds of thousands of years. But then the prequels kind of fleshed it out a bit more, but it wasn't necessarily in line with the mythology of it. It was just a fun story to be added to. But then the sequels came along and
ruined everything.
But specifically episode 8, and it was essentially the deconstruction of all of Star Wars and the usurpment and
Is episode 8 the one that J.J. Abrams directed?
No, that was Rian Johnson.
Okay. And J.J. Abrams did
7 and 9.
Oh, he did 9 too. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I keep thinking back to episode 8. I think that's the one where Princess Leia goes out into space and somehow uses the Force to come back in. That was the moment that I just always remember as okay, this is it was ridiculous before that, but that was just it was just too over the top.
Yeah.
But all the sequels, 7, 8, 9, all have a lot of instances of new abilities, new Force abilities.
Yeah.
With people that are not trained as well as the entire Jedi Order from episodes 1 through 3.
Bring it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you watch the Ahsoka series?
No. I watched what's the one where he goes to jail? It's the guy who was in Rogue One.
Oh, Andor.
Yeah, I really liked Andor.
Andor was good.
I don't know who the character, I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. But the character who was in Coruscant, who's kind of masterminding, he's the puppet master. He's pulling all the strings. But his little monologue there, that was amazing. That was a fantastic episode.
Damn, I can't remember the guy's actual character.
I think they have the second season's supposed to come out, mid 2025, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
Or early 20, I forget.
Yeah.
But
that was arguably the best thing that's come out of Disney Star Wars.
Well, Rogue One, but
Rogue One was good. Yeah. At this point, it's partly because it's new characters that aren't necessarily associated with the original trilogy, and so they're not trying to tarnish.
Right. They're not trying to mess with the originals.
Yeah.
I have a theory that when you get away from the original creator and or you infuse too much money into the project, you lose touch of the story. So for example, right? You have episodes 4, 5, 6. George Lucas is kind of the main driver there. He comes back, he makes 1, 2, 3. And then he sells the whole thing to Disney and somebody else comes in and makes 7, 8, 9. Of course they're not gonna fit to George Lucas's vision. And not only
At
that,
least entirely, yeah.
But
I think the biggest thing is that George Lucas had a potential sequel trilogy.
He did, but they scrapped the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, and then you look at Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings was great, but then you just infused way too much money and way overdid it with The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And I heard
it would have been better as just 2 parts. I think they had a thing. Somebody did this online where they took episode 3 of Star Wars and they cut out all the corny stuff. And they shortened the movie by, 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was way better. And they published it, I think, on YouTube or some other platform or something. I saw parts of it. And I was thinking about, man, someone should do that for The Hobbit. Yeah. Take the 3 movies, cut out a ton of the stuff.
Yeah.
Mostly the white orc, whatever his name is.
Stuff.
Yeah. cut out a bunch of those other tangential plot lines, shorten down the movie, take out a bunch of the
Take
stupid.
out Legolas entirely out.
Not entirely. Like, you don't have to take out everything, but like cut down a lot of the corny stuff
Yeah.
and make it a 2-part movie.
Yeah.
I think that would have been way better, and that was the original intent too. So
Yeah, and because part of it was Peter Jackson didn't actually have a full script. Did you
oh
hear about
really?
this?
No, I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
And so he was like kind of making it up as he was going.
That's interesting. I thought there was another director attached to it, and then he got kicked out.
Yeah, it
partway
was
through.
going to be Guillermo del Toro.
Okay.
And he's another one has a super interesting, very it's mostly fantasy work that he does. But the style that he has
Del Toro?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It is funny. You think Peter Jackson and you only know him for The Lord of the Rings.
Right. Well, I know he did King Kong, right? Or
I have no idea.
Godzilla. Well, he did one of those movies right after. And he did another movie with somebody. Who was it? The Lovely Bones. Came out like 2-3 years after the Return of the King, I think. That was his like next fantasy movie. Both of them flopped, I think. I don't think either of them did that well after Lord of the Rings. So, yeah.
It's almost like the one-hit wonder.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. When you put that much time and energy into that, like, yeah, it's hard to follow it up with anything. Which is why Christopher Nolan is so amazing. Like, he's clearly works on his projects for years before he really gives it any sort of production time.
Yeah. Well, it's more like I think it's like a year, at least on the script.
Yeah, but like I remember hearing stuff like with Inception, like he was working on the plot line for years before he ever approached the studio about it. And I think those are the types of projects. Same thing I think with Memento, or maybe it was his brother I think his brother came up with a script for Memento.
Yeah, I thought his brother was writing the short story as he was writing the script for it.
Okay.
And so they both didn't actually know what the story ended, like how the story ended when they started writing it.
With Memento?
Yeah.
Did you ever watch Memento?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
I need to see it.
It's trippy.
Yeah.
It's weird the way you kind of know how it's structured, right? How they show it. But it almost causes you to have short-term memory loss as you watch the film.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
Which is really weird. So, yeah, it's hard to, you get to the end and you're like, it makes sense. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. How did that happen?
There's this great like prank or whatever it is that these guys did with this. This guy goes into a doctor's office and he's like checking out his spine, and he's like, the doctor's talking to him, and then he goes, yeah, and sometimes this area causes like vision impairment or hallucinations, and then he like stops talking, disappears, and then that same guy walks in through another door and starts talking to him and begins the whole doctor's appointment. And then the guy's like, what's going on? And he turns around, and the guy that was talking to him behind him is now a skeleton. He's just like, wait, hold on. What the heck just happened? So it was like a total, like, it was like twins or doctors. And, but the guy's just absolutely silent, and it's just like eyes giant,
freaking out.
What just happened? Just looking around. What did I just miss?
Well, some people have stuff like that, the schizophrenia or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever watch Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe?
No.
That's a good movie. That was like Russell Crowe in his golden era.
Dude, his movies recently have sucked.
I haven't seen anything recent that he's been in.
Well,
but
he was
those
in Thor: Love and Thunder and
I didn't see that.
Kraven the Hunter movie as well.
Okay, I haven't seen either of those.
Both of those flopped.
Yeah. No, the in Beautiful Mind, he plays a guy. I forget the name, but he basically has schizophrenia,
Mm-hmm.
and he has like a really good friend that's along with him for the whole ride, and the whole movie is like a lie. Like everything that you see is a complete lie because you're seeing it through how he imagines the world and not through reality. Like,
Yeah,
and it's because he has schizophrenia.
that's
Um,
crazy.
the character that he plays, because it's based on a true story, I guess won the Nobel Peace Prize for something in, I don't know what it was, mathematics or physics or something. He was a genius.
Oh,
But the whole time he's at school, like as he's going to work and stuff, everything's not as it appears.
yeah, yeah.
So it's a weird movie.
That's
But
crazy.
yeah.
Okay, so I have a few questions here. One of which is along the lines of movies, TV shows, and all this fun entertainment stuff.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation a bit ago with a friend that I thought this topic was super interesting, and you had an interesting take on it. And I think we could go a bit back and forth on. And
I'll try to remember what I talked about.
well, I mean, I think we can dive a bit more into it here.
Yeah.
Because less is actually happening, at least around this space. So the topic is basically, as Christians and as people who want to be pure of heart and just want to go through life in a mindful way, what are some, I guess, kinds of entertainment and not necessarily topics, but maybe genres and certain thresholds that you perceive are detrimental and should be avoided?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the conversation we had with our mutual friend on that.
Yeah. I think you were talking a little bit about, or I think the impetus was the conversation around horror movies. And I think you had an interesting take that I slightly disagreed with. So,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to remember the conversation a little bit, but yeah, I think there's a verse in the Bible that says whatever's true, whatever's pure, whatever's holy, think on these things. And so I think as a self-professing Christian, we should, to the best of our ability, or maybe as far as your conscience allows you, you should be considering what you're taking in the form of all content. Since rededicating my life to the Lord in 2022 and getting rebaptized, I've tried to take the approach.
When was that?
I rededicated my life to the Lord May 4th, ironically, which for those who don't know is a Star Wars day.
One of my friends her birthday is on May 4th, and she hates it. It's so funny. She's like, I swear, if anyone says May the 4th to me, May the 4th be with you, I'm going to kill him.
Yeah, just to be clear, like that wasn't intentional. It just happened to be the day that, I was having a discussion with a mentor of mine.
Come up out of the water holding a lightsaber.
No, that was the day, rededicated my life to the Lord, and then a couple months later got rebaptized a second time, which is a whole nother discussion we can have. But the point being is, after that, I've tried to take a little bit more of an approach of, okay, I need to rethink, what content I'm allowing myself to view, listen, watch, whatever. So, we could talk about movies, but this could also apply to explicit music, so I'll start with music first.
Okay.
I have never really particularly enjoyed like metal or like any sort of like heavy metal type of music, screamo stuff.
Yeah.
There's been times like if I'm working out, like 2 or 3 songs that I like, I'm okay with it. In the last couple of years, as I've kind of reevaluated this whole thing, I take the approach of, okay, what is okay for me to listen to, and then is it beneficial for me to listen to?
Mm-hmm.
And most, for me, I don't want to fill my head with explicit music for the most part. Um, so for me, it's, if there's songs that have a lot of F bombs, like that will just sit with me for a week or two. And so I try not to do anything that has any explicit music, which I'll be honest, like, is kind of tough because there's always some music that's like, it's really good. And there's just one, like, it's not even like a F bomb, it's a minor word. So minor, I put in quotes. But in terms of movies, it's the same thing for me. So I had heard in homeschool circles or in Christian circles, when I was growing up, there was a lot of talk or discussion around our movies should be not allowed for Christian
rated R movies.
Yeah, rated R movies. And I disagreed with that, being a rebellious teenager. But now I think I still disagree with it largely, because there's a lot of really good R movies, and there are for gore or something else. Like, Braveheart is a good example.
Yeah.
That movie was made in the 90s. There's a lot of blood, and there's, an implied sex scene, and some other stuff. I don't think there's a ton of language. So no, like, kids shouldn't be watching it.
It's all in Scottish anyways. Who can actually understand
it? With some Irish too. Don't forget the Irish.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so that's a movie that I would, if I had kids, I would definitely want my kids to see at some point. I wouldn't let them watch it at 5 years old, but when they're
within reason.
Yeah, when they're, Passion of the Christ is another one. It's rated R for a reason. It's a great, fantastic movie. I didn't let myself watch it for years because I knew as soon as I watched it, it would just take on a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
And so I watched it as an adult, a couple of years back. So
when you can somewhat comprehend.
Right. Yeah. But there's other R-rated movies. I can't, think of a ton, but like, I'm not going to go see. Personally, I don't think horror movies are beneficial, pure, beautiful things that a Christian should fill their mind with. And so largely I avoid those. Thriller movies is a little bit of a hybrid between, I'll call it action and horror, for lack of a better term. And, I approach those on kind of a case by case basis. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not going to go see, Chainsaw Massacre or, any of those other horror movies. So I largely avoid them.
Okay. So.
You disagree.
Very, very interesting. Yes. So. I disagree with the blanket, we shouldn't watch horror movies. This is coming from a guy that hates horror. So
okay.
I'm defending something that I hate, not because I think it's necessarily, or I don't love it, but that doesn't mean that I don't like.
That you also hate it.
Or I don't like. I guess. How do I say this? I don't think it's an immoral thing if you're gonna watch a horror movie.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about the glorification of rape and, beating up women or something like that, that's probably not something that a Christian should be supporting through ticket sales or streaming online or something like that.
Totally.
If we're talking about something like, a jump scare from a bunch of crows that are, in a haunted mansion or something like that, and that's where the movie kind of centers around. Is it beneficial? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, that's what, I think where I draw the line is, not draw a line, but that's the way I approach it is Paul talks about, whatever is beneficial or all things are permissible, not all things are beneficial. And
True.
so
Yeah.
it's the same reason why, you know, we'll take a side tangent here. But like, it's the same reason why I don't drink. Drinking is not
I
a
want to get
problem.
into that too.
Drinking wine, drinking alcohol is not a problem. But not everything is beneficial. So I am, as a person saved by grace, I'm fully allowed to do whatever I want because I'm saved by grace. That does not mean I should do everything that I want.
True.
And so, you know, I don't think I have an issue with alcohol. I think I'd be probably perfectly fine to be reasonable and to know when to toe the line. But I also don't drink for a reason, because I think I should, well, for many reasons, but one of which is I'm trying to set a higher standard for the people around my life, but also for myself. And so it's the same thing when it comes to content in movies or music and explicit music. You know, I try to set a high bar. I'm not perfect at any of this, like I'm a work in progress. So, the next time you see me at the theater watching, the next R-rated movie, don't call me out. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a blanket statement, but it's definitely a case by case with movies, at least.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I think there's even some PG movies where I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah, like most romantic comedies. Seems like most romantic comedies nowadays have so much sexual innuendo. It's like, this should be R or PG-13 or something higher than PG.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, that can get into a whole nother topic with the rating system and whether or not we should go based off that. So, I mean, without going there, I think as a Christian, you should approach it by looking up the unbiased content guide. I personally use IMDb. This is a perfect example, right? I saw Oppenheimer, which was a decent movie. I have my thoughts on the plot, but content-wise, there were some pretty explicit sexual scenes.
Yeah.
Not explicit. I shouldn't. Well, yeah,
yes.
they were explicit.
Yes, they were.
They were explicit. And it was jarring for me because I did not know that those were going to be in there ahead of time. And
that would, yeah.
And
I didn't know that those were going to be in there.
That was a great reminder. Like, I should have looked up the content and ahead of time before buying a ticket. And would it have changed my mind to go in there? Maybe. I honestly think I might not have gone and seen it. Mm-hmm. Because nowadays we can wait until it's streaming, and then there's so many tools you can filter out stuff now. So I definitely think on that one I would have reconsidered going. If I had gone, I would have read in the content, like usually they give you a hint of like when it might occur in the movie. And so sometimes you can kind of gauge like based on when it might happen. And then I would know to like leave the theater or look away ahead of time. With language, you can't really do that as well. So if it's a really, really filthy movie, just in terms of how much cursing there is or swearing or whatever, then generally I try to avoid it, because that, for me personally, I just don't want to fill my head with that. And then you end up talking that way and you start cussing every other word, or maybe you don't, you're just thinking it and you're having to consciously, and you have to consciously filter yourself, right? Or you substitute it with some other PG word, like instead of hell yeah, you're saying heck yeah, or something like that, so I don't know. Yeah, it's
you definitely, I think it's more of a postural issue rather than a genre issue of like, if it's a glorification of some sort of like, for instance, some sort of like crime ring or sex ring or something crazy like that, as opposed to Sound of Freedom.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same thing, but different postural stance. And so, or I guess same topic rather.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's a great example too. For Sound of Freedom walked that line so well of not showing anything graphic, but fully like not in, I'm embracing is the wrong term, but like
Immersing yourself into what's actually
that
happening.
scenario. Yeah, exactly. Like this is what's going on, and we're not going to shy away from the topic, but we're also not going to show anything because we don't want to glorify it.
Yeah.
I forget who I heard through the grapevine that whoever came up with the movie or whoever was directing, somebody said as they were making it, it was like, when we make this, you have to make it in a way that someone's not going to get triggered by it. Like a survivor's not going to be triggered by any of the scenes.
Oh, okay.
And then also the perpetrators are not going to be triggered to do more evil. So it was a really well like line that they walked there, in my opinion. In my opinion, I think they shied a little bit away on certain topics. Like I think they could have been
a bit more abrasive.
Yeah. And for example, like in Passion of the Christ, they don't shy away from the fact that Jesus gets absolutely flogged. And they don't hide that. If I think they could have done
Sound of Freedom rated R?
I can't remember. I want to say yes, but I can't remember.
I thought it was PG-13.
It might have been PG-13. Now I'm curious. But yeah, the point being is like there was 2 or 3 scenes in Sound of Freedom where I was like, okay, I know you're a Christian company, and because of that, I know that's why you cut away. If you hadn't cut away, it would have held more weight, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you should be explicit and show, vile acts. But they could have gone a little bit further.
Yeah. It is funny, like the idea that my mom kind of has this.
Oh yeah, you're right. I looked it up. Sound of Freedom is PG-13. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Good. My mom has this perception of cuss words, and she kind of says that you should be able to use them in the right circumstances to carry a certain weight, but this doesn't mean that you should be,
doesn't mean you should be going around using them. Yeah
it's that delicate balance of necessary force, essentially.
So I think, in general, all this to say, on at least on my perspective, with music, with movies, with TV, and certain lifestyle choices that I have, like for example the not drinking, I think all that kind of comes back to this. When as a Christian, you're going to stand before God at some point, and you're going to have to give an account for your life and every action you did. That is kind of hard to grasp, I think, for a lot of Christians. So the way I like to think about it is, okay, I'm an ambassador for Christ. If I was an ambassador for the US, for the USA overseas, I would probably want to act a certain way and behave a certain way that didn't, because foreigners are looking at me, and that's their perception of America. And so I would want to act in a certain way that didn't give off the wrong ideals or anything like that. I think Christians should approach it this exact same way. So that's I guess where I go with horror movies, and to answer your question.
So how would seeing a horror movie, I guess, affect that ambassadorship?
Well, it's gonna do it in one of two ways. One, if you're going out to a movie with your friends, let's say you're going out with a mix of Christians and non-Christians, and you're all going to see a horror movie. There might be one or two Christians in that group that don't feel comfortable with it, and by going, you are unconsciously encouraging the behavior, or consciously, one of the two. And secondly, you're filling your mind with things that aren't necessarily beneficial for you. Again, going back to that verse from Paul, which will affect how you think about things over the next days, weeks, or even hours. And so that also affects you.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it.
Yeah, there was we were discussing the armor of God like maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, maybe even longer now. But regardless, we were talking about the shield. Which one is it? The
Shield of faith?
Yeah, I think. But all that to say is the shield was to quench the flaming arrows of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And my kind of understanding of that was almost in a sense of the enemy might be shooting arrows at you, but at the same time they might have a flaming tip which then ignites other parts of you in other unforeseen ways. Even if you stop the arrow, that doesn't mean you stop the flames. And so those flames can kind of be the unconscious effects of those arrows that you might not be fully aware of. And some shields were made out of wood, and so those flaming arrows, if you don't have the right shield and the right I guess coating or material of your shield / faith, then that flame can then start to infect your shield and therefore start to burn your arm and travel up throughout your body. So that was kind of a interesting understanding of it.
And you're likening the flaming arrows to potentially dangerous movies. Not maybe dangerous is too strong of a word, but maybe they're fine movies, but there's maybe just a little phrase or a clip or something that can kind of get through your armor
in a way, yeah.
in a way, and that could flare up behaviors or thoughts in your life that aren't glorifying God.
That's every story needs an antagonist. The difference between a good movie and a bad movie can very well be the glorification or the toppling of such villain. And so
can also be the hero being an anti-hero too. Like in the case of Venom, for instance, that's a hero that isn't really doing all the right things necessarily. He's kind of an anti-hero. And that's kind of glorifying what, if you twisted the story around and told it from a different perspective, that might be the villain.
Yeah, but that is part of this day and age's the philosophy of this culture of that there is no meta narrative that persists over time and across cultures, and the fact that there's they believe that there is no moral um, absolutes, and so everything, if you look at it from a different angle, can be shifted into hero or villain or slash good or bad. Um, and so I see that a lot of with the um, like Maleficent, with Wicked, with
Mm-hmm.
movies like that. Of what if, and like Cruella, and it's like, what if the villain was just misunderstood? And it's like, yeah, but they're also killing puppies. Like, I don't care what you're doing. If you're killing puppies, like that should be a um, pretty good indicator of, that you're doing something wrong. My brother had a little maxim when he was like 5 or 6 years old. Of my mom asked him, "What's the definition of a good movie?" And he responded with, "You don't kill the dog."
It's a good rule of thumb.
Right? Um, Evidently, he hadn't seen too many Disney movies, and so at that point, it was "Don't kill the dog," not "Don't kill the parents."
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Disney does seem to have an obsession with
Yeah,
killing off
vendetta against killing
against the parents.
and getting a bunch of either half or full orphans.
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
the friggin' opening scene of
Is that Frozen?
101 Dalmatians.
Oh.
They're like, we have 10 or what is it, 10 or 11 puppies, and then the like nanny comes out and she's like, "Never mind, we lost one." And it's like, wait, what? And so the dad, apparently, if you like rub the puppy and like get him warm a little bit, it'll.
Oh, it might revive him.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So he does eventually revive him, but it was just like, oh, what just happened?
I haven't seen those movies in so long.
I've been kind of going back and watching some of the old ones, and
All the old princess movies.
yeah, yeah, of
I'm
course,
kidding.
'cause why not?
Yeah.
I just watched Princess and the Frog, and that was
Oh, interesting.
that's got to be definitely the most, or it was definitely one of the earliest. What do you call? Most explicitly culturally infected Disney movies.
Yeah, I don't remember that one really at all, other than I know my parents didn't like it when we watched it as a family. Again, another example of a movie that we didn't vet ahead of time. I don't remember. I kind of want to go back and rewatch it now as an adult.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it was as bad as I remember it. Probably not. But I feel like there was some sort of witchcraft or voodoo or something in there, and that really turned us off to it. But again, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's probably fine-ish. I mean, we're not talking about a horror movie here. We're talking about something else that's, dabbles in it, but in a way that kids are going to understand it.
Yeah, it's in a way that you can understand it, and in a way that, again, how I was discussing, or how I was saying that it was the perception of the witchcraft was in a light that it is on the villain side, and it's done with the like his whole arc is that he's trying to appease the entities on the other side that he has since like he's almost indebted to those people, and he's trying to lessen his sentence in a way, and then by doing whatever the heck he's doing in the movie, and then turns out he gets further indebted, and then calls on their help more, and then by the end of it he fails to do his task, and then he basically gets eaten by the ones on the other side.
Mm.
And so it is a cautionary tale of don't mess with that stuff, and don't like get involved with, or I guess don't don't tell someone that you can do something when you don't believe you can. In a way.
Yeah, I'll have to rewatch it and see if I still think it's as bad as it was when I was a kid.
Yeah, it was interesting because it's clearly it's a play on the trope of princess kissing the frog
Yeah.
and then turns into a prince.
Yeah.
And they live happily ever after. But that story is just the princess kisses frog, frog turns into prince. Yay.
Yeah.
That's the story. But then they stretch it out into this
hour and a half
long movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, sentence long story does happen, but over the course of all this,
there's a lot of fluff in there that
yeah.
expanded the movie to 90-minute.
Yeah. And it's done with a specific culture, so it's interesting, but it's definitely not. It ain't the Lion King.
Yeah. So you had another topic that you wanted to talk about. You said you wanted to go dive into the favorite predestination topic. I think
we can dive into it, man, if you want.
I don't know how well I'm gonna be able to speak to it because I'm not an expert on it at all.
Oh, me neither.
But if it's a conversation you want to talk about, we can do it.
Yeah, I'm down. So yeah, I wanted to, I guess, for the listener, Kyle and I, we do a guys Bible study, and there's definitely been a consistent thread of conversation surrounding the issue of not necessarily predestination, but a part of it, but mostly in terms of free will, determinism, and whether or not we actually have agency, or if everything is purely deterministic.
Yeah, and
specifically from a Christian perspective, reading the Bible and like prophecy and all that.
a consistent thread of this conversation is an understatement. There's been some severe debates in our group over.
I wouldn't say severe, but
it borders on severe. But yeah, we got some strong opinions both ways. So yeah, I guess so. The little I know about this is it comes down to two different philosophies within the Christian church. One is Arminianism, which essentially believes that there is such a thing as free will, that God allows us to choose whether or not we believe in Christ, believe that Jesus is God, and then as a result of that, whether or not we essentially choose Jesus, and then Jesus allows us to go to heaven because of our belief in him. The counteracting belief on the other side of the religious aisle is Calvinism, which, as I understand it, is the belief that God is 100% sovereign and everything is pre-planned according to his will, which means that we are living without free will, and that whether or not we go to heaven or hell is predetermined, and we don't have really a huge choice in the matter, or the choices that we make fall into God's his will. Um, I don't know about you, but I mean, I think I assume we both probably grew up more on the I can't speak today, Arminianism camp,
Hmm.
with the free will, and it was kind of nothing that we really even talked about growing up. It was just a, you know,
Just general understanding.
yeah, and it's kind of implied, I guess, as we talk about salvation or, um, topics within the church. And so I've only recently encountered the whole other side, and so I've been interested in kind of exploring it. And I've explored it a little bit in the past. In like high school, I think we had a Bible study that kind of briefly went through it. Um, so Calvinism has like these 5 tenets, and they are abbreviated to TULIP. Don't ask me to go through all of them because I don't remember all of them. But um, you know, they're basically um, these tenets that kind of all aggregated, combined, are the foundation for the idea that we don't have free will and that everything's predetermined. So that's where the predestination um, term comes from for anyone who isn't aware, and that's that we are predestined to go to heaven or hell. So with that, I guess, backdrop, we have some members in our group that believe predestination isn't a thing, and we have others that strongly believe that predestination could be a possibility.
I think could be is the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
There's a curiosity for sure.
yeah, I don't know if I have a strong belief one way or the other. Um, I would say it is a strong possibility that we don't have free will, but I don't think it's to the same extreme that a hardcore Calvinist would believe. And I guess I'm going to use a very bad example here, but I was talking about this one time with somebody, and the analogy that we used was this idea that if you're a parent, let's say a dad, and you have a toddler, and you're ironing clothes, which this happened in our family, so this is why I use this example. And the parent tells the child, "Don't touch the iron. It's hot. It will burn you."
Yeah.
The parent knows that the kid's curiosity is going to overtake him, and the kid, parents know kids' personalities really, really well. They know what the kid is going to do. I don't know, some vast majority of the time.
If they're good parents.
If they're good parents, yeah. And so, yeah, a good parent's going to probably know that the kid is going to be interested, curious, whatever, and
As they should be.
and going to touch the iron, even though it's hot. And so, to some degree, we could say that the parent has some predetermined, like, knowledge of what the child is going to do. And obviously I'm using a human example, so it's not 100% valid.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the same way I look at this, is like God knows, because he made us, and because he knows what experiences we're going through life, he's still reaching to us and trying to win us all over to him. Like he wants the whole world to be saved.
Yeah.
I think he still knows what we're going to end up choosing because he made us.
Mm-hmm.
But that opens like a whole can of worms of like, well, then if God knows that some people will go to hell, then how can God be good or 100% good, because he's essentially sending his creation to hell? And that's where I don't know, and where I probably need to study a lot more on it. And I guess my only answer there would probably be, well, we're the ones choosing and not God on where we go, and so we choose to go to hell, we choose to go to heaven, but somehow God knows what what we're going to choose. So, yeah, that's kind of the camp I'm in. I've got a foot in both camps, I think.
Yeah, I think I do as well. I've kind of been I thought of the kind of the idea of I can't even remember why I thought of this as the, I guess, what?
As the topic for the podcast.
No, why I thought of the phrase "the world in his hands," and like just that idea, and what exactly that meant, and in a way, I think it's kind of like he sets up the rules of the game in the sense of, say you're playing soccer or hockey or whatever. You can't play soccer or hockey without having the pre-established rules of the game, because otherwise it's no longer the game.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that and you can't play the game in an effective way, and then once the rules are instated, they are parameters to help you play the game. But if you transgress those rules, then you end up making the game not only worse, but also there are consequences to those actions. And so in a way that's kind of a way to think about it. And in terms of the free will determinism conversation, I think there's a difference between causation and consequences and free will, in that he sets up the rules of the game, but then he allows the players to play their way.
That makes some sense to me, because if I think about it in terms of like Adam and Eve, right? God said, okay, the rules of the game are you can eat any fruit except this one. Mm-hmm. Did God know that they were going to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Of course, like he knew that was going to happen, but he still allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it gets into some hairy philosophical ideas where you start thinking about, well, then how could a good God allow that to happen? And, them eating the fruit then allows sin into the world.
I don't understand that line of argument of how could a good God allow this to happen. And I think because my understanding is only a good God would allow that to happen.
Would allow what to happen? Let's be
Everything.
Specific. So, okay. I think the argument is, if I'm going to play the Calvinist point of view, I think it's the Calvinist point of view, is that if God allows free will, then he's allowing people so he knows what people are going to choose. So he knows that half of creation, I'm using a random number, it could be more or less, but he knows, for example, 5 out of 10 people are going to choose hell. So in a way, he designed creatures that are going to choose hell. That puts a lot of responsibility on God, who essentially, in a way, indirectly is sending people to hell. I think that's the argument. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the argument I've heard, and I'm inclined to say, well, yeah, so that doesn't make sense, because we know God is, it literally says in the Bible, God is love. So
yeah,
a good God can't do something like that in a way. But I'm also not like well versed enough. I'd be interested. You should have Pastor Jason on your podcast.
Yeah, I want to
definitely quiz him, because I'd be curious to know what he says.
Yeah. I want to talk to him about heaven and hell, and on the free will
Yeah.
conversation for sure.
I think a lot of this, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I think a lot of this stems from also how we read the Bible today. And I think it comes mostly from the way we're translating it to English. And I'm not saying that the Bible has errors. I think it's inerrant. But sometimes, you know how, like, you know, pastors will say, like, here's the word, and it means, you know, we translate it as this. But if you look at the Greek root, it could, you know, synonyms also mean X, Y, and Z. And so you can get a little bit more broader understanding of the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we could also have that same issue here, and that's where Calvinism and Arminianism is stemming from, in that you might read a text and it will say, you know, free will or choice or something in the Bible, and we assume a lot from those words. Like I was trying to think of an example.
Determinism and free will are actually, those terms are in the Bible though?
I can't think of an instance where those occur, but I know one of the verses that Calvinism or Calvinists will point to sometimes. I just looked it up to make sure I was correct on this, but there's a verse in John 6:37 that says that and this is Jesus speaking, all that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away. And
there's still an act of free will in that though.
Right, but I think they would, you know, I think some people would read that and go, okay, the Father gives me implies that the Father has predetermined who will be given and who will not be. And so I think things like that is where we can draw certain phrases, then we create these big philosophical debates over them. Maybe this is me sticking my head in the sand, but I kind of want to just be like, guys, I think we're making a lot out of nothing. You know, we don't know if we are predetermined to go to heaven or hell or not. When I read the Bible, it says whoever believes in him will inherit eternal life. So I'm going to choose to believe in him, and if I am predetermined to make the wrong choice, I guess it will happen. Or if I was predetermined to make the right choice, it will happen. So
yeah, that's the nice part about the Christian religion, is you don't have to have everything right in order to go to hell or heaven. Ugh.
Yeah.
You definitely have to. You don't have to have everything right to go to hell.
You might think you have everything figured out,
yeah,
and
I think that's the issue. Yeah,
that will guarantee you might go to hell.
But yeah, still one of my favorite things that I've come to understand about God and heaven is that we need an eternal time to understand an eternal God.
Yeah, if we ever,
or at least
if we ever understand God. Yeah. But I think what we know of him right now is that God's character, it says God is love, and if you read the Bible front to back from the perspective of God reaching people, I think you come away with this idea that God really does want everyone to be saved, but we know that most people will reject him. And so to me, all that kind of implies choice, but I'm no philosopher on this, so who knows? Maybe I'm off.
Yeah,
it could also be a scenario where two things are true at the same time, and we just can't fully comprehend it, and so again, maybe it's me sticking my head in the sand and not wanting to think about really deep things, but I'm kind of just I can't decide whether or not I'm predestined, and I don't want to. I think there's better things we can do with our time than argue over this. Instead, we could be reaching more people.
Yeah.
But it does become an issue because it's a salvation issue. So, and a hardcore Calvinist, if you take the Calvinist view to the extreme, you wouldn't reach out to people, because if they're predestined to go to heaven, they'll go to heaven. They'll find a way, God will find a way. And everyone else will burn in hell. So if you take it to that extreme, that also doesn't feel like a loving God. So maybe I am anti-Calvinist. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely it's interesting. It's a very hairy topic. Because I think there's a certain threshold to, I think, both. Because I think the core of it is God in control or not? And I think
I think God can be in control either way. I think it's whether or not he allows us to have the choice to choose our eternal destination.
but that's him giving up control over
limited control. He's only giving up limited control, and that's just the control for us to choose. So I don't think it's him giving up complete control. I mean, he's still God. But and this goes back to like the whole conversation I think we had last week of, when Jesus is in front of Pilate, and Pilate, chooses to hand Jesus over to the Pharisees. Was that Pilate's choice, or was that predetermined that Pilate would choose to hand over Jesus? It gets. I think the other night when we had that come up at our Bible study, we were just like, okay, we're done. We're not going to approach this. I didn't want to open the can of worms with everyone there. So
yeah, there's other more interesting topics than this.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
Okay, you have a few. Well, let me preface it with, on one of my first episodes that I did, me and my buddy started talking about, I think, bullying, and I ended up making a somewhat satirical argument for bullying. And so
that's dangerous.
He kind of coined the segment of the show, I'll give you the shovel, you bury yourself segment. And so I kind of wanted to implement that into the podcast a little bit. So how far you want to go on this? I'm all in. So
okay.
I know you have some very interesting perspectives on Christianity and some of the issues with, I think one that you've brought to the guys group of the purpose of marriage has been very instrumental and very insightful, in the sense of the purpose of marriage being the purpose of a wife, rather, is a helpmate, as described in the Garden of Eden. And so I was curious, are there any other, or what are they, and what, how do you see them being, I guess, twisted, and then how do you see them being correctly implemented?
Man, you weren't kidding. You're definitely giving me the shovel here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna.
I'll try not to kick
I'm gonna
it
get
on
in.
top of you.
I'm gonna be single for decades at this rate if I keep talking. No, I think what I brought up the other night at the men's group was, look, okay, in the American Christian church, we've been preached, or at least I've been preached to growing up, this idea, and it hasn't just been pastors, it's been like this whole cultural Christianity, right? That the purpose of marriage from the man's perspective is to serve sacrificially, his wife and his kids, and to basically lay his entire life down on the line, so that his wife and kids can flourish. And I think that all stems from, there's a verse in the New Testament that Paul's talking about that, like, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, laying his life down for the church. And I fully 100% agree with that. Like, that is God's word. So I'm not going to go against that.
I think
On the other hand, okay, go ahead.
I'm sure you're probably going to get to this, but I think the other cultural understanding of marriage is that it's a reflection of God's relationship with the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also, I think it's in that same section, or a related section, where Paul's talking about wives and husbands and their role and how that relates
to
the
bride of Christ, or the church is the bride of Christ.
Right. And so, yeah, we are the bride of Christ. Christ is the bridegroom. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church, and wives should love their husbands as we should submit to the Lord. So, while I think that's true, I think it often overlooks this other idea that is literally what God says in Genesis, is that it's not good for man to be alone, and so I will create a helpmate for him. And how we
gorgeous one thing, Lord.
Yeah. And I think we could define helpmate a couple different ways, but the way I was thinking about it in terms of our conversation with the guys group was, we were talking about it as, okay, well, you have this life when you're single, and you're, if you're a Christian, you're maybe doing some ministry stuff, and then when you get married, you kind of put that off to the side, or maybe it's not as much of a focus because you're focusing on your wife and kids, which is all great, and that's what you would do if you only looked at that passage from Paul. And I was making the argument in the guys group that, as I think that's one facet of a larger idea, that if we go back to Genesis, it says, God says, I'll make a helpmate for man. And so I think, or I was floating the idea, I should say, I don't know if I fully believe this yet, but I was, bringing up the idea that the purpose of marriage is maybe not just only for men to live self-sacrificially, but also to find someone who can partner with you that would amplify your ability to minister to the lost.
Totally.
And I think when you take that view, it's much bigger, first of all, and it puts a lot more responsibility on both parties, husbands and wives, to do ministry. And so,
are you thinking about this in terms specifically of a ministry perspective, or?
Well, I think it could also apply to other things. If you take the view of, traditional marriage, that the man goes and works and provides for the home, and he needs a helper to be able to manage the home, and that is what traditionally American wives at least have done. I'm sure other cultures have a similar tradition. But just looking at the American church, I think the view of marriage has been a little bit distorted to be more focused on,
to say the least.
Specifically from the man's perspective, in that it's distorted to the point of, we have to live this sacrificial life where you deny anything that you want. I'm taking the example to the extreme here.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's healthy or wise or what God intended. Obviously marriage is a reflection of our relationship with Christ, Pastor Ben was just talking about that today. But also, I think it could also be enhanced. The definition could be enhanced to say, men, you were given a mission and a purpose. And we see that when God gives Adam a mission and a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And wives are a enhancer to that mission and purpose. They are a helper to that end.
Yeah,
and
one
so,
of the things that I've really come to understand that I should and do want in a wife is a nurturing woman. And I think the term nurturing has really kind of been sticking out to me and really been like kind of pounding into my head of like, okay, there's a certain amount of guys typically create or destroy things because that we love to build and we love our
we love explosions.
Balls. Yeah. But then we're not exactly the gardening type.
Some men are, but
true. Yes,
yeah, the majority, I would say, probably don't tend to swing that way.
No, yeah. So having someone to flourish the behind the scenes and bolster the ability to do those things and to help grow the ability to create and grow the ability to destroy effectively and in the correct manner is such a vital piece of the equation because all guys can, well, so bad with generalizations, but typically guys can create and just destroy just bare minimum generally. But having someone foster that ability and have them grow in that ability is having someone dedicated for that is so helpful.
Yeah. I think it's John Eldridge's Wild at Heart talks about a lot of the ways that men and women complement each other, and I think that's one of the things that that the woman's ability to nurture generally far exceeds man's, and that is one of the compliments that he kind of explores in Wild at Heart, which I really like as a good book for any young man to read. I think it's a good one to.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever read it.
No. That was one of the other things that I want to start doing in this podcast is getting a like 3 kind of or any number of books that people recommend at the end of that.
I like that. I got a long list. Yeah, well, Wild at Heart is a good one. It's a good one for any young men, and helps you kind of understand more kind of God's purpose and masculinity.
Specifically for marriage?
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's a marriage book at all. It's specific to young men or men in general. And John Eldridge, it's not gospel truth, so don't take it that way. But I thought it was a good way to explore the purpose behind masculinity and and the way women complement that. So, yeah. What other controversial takes do you want me to dig my grave with?
Well, I don't know. I was curious what others you had.
Man, I'm trying to think. Well, the alcohol, not drinking, has been a topic that as I've grown up and hit the adult world has definitely, it's been a conversation starter or ender many times, especially when you're working and in the work world, because happy hour is a thing, it seems like everywhere.
I hear my dad also kind of
yeah, he didn't tell me that there was alcohol and communion at one of the weddings we went to recently, and that kind of threw me off. So it'd be rude if I spat it out in front of like
Yeah,
the whole
yeah.
crowd there. Not the whole crowd, but the people around me. So yeah, that's
I'm Kyle, and I disapprove of this communion.
yeah. So to be clear, I don't drink. I've drunk alcohol twice that I know of, willingly. One as a kid.
Your roommate's just spoon feeding you alcohol as you're asleep. Just drink this. You're gonna wake up really dizzy tomorrow morning.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's in all sorts of food and used as kind of a
Yeah.
thing to bake and stuff. So I'm talking about like consciously drinking it.
Yeah.
There's been once as a kid and then once, at the wedding, which was
What
just
the first time?
just as a kid, like parents are like, yeah, you want to sip, as a taste. And I'm like, yeah, I'm curious. I don't know how old I was, 11, 12, 13, 15.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And you have like less than a teaspoon amount, and you hate it as a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, again, the second time was at the wedding
I've got a total sweet tooth. And so, when we were in Florence, on our Europe trip, but almost 2 years ago now, which is insane.
wow.
But like, when else are you in Florence able to try Florentine wine? So it's kind of like, all right, we'll try it out.
Yeah.
And so I tasted it, and my mouth turned into an anus. It was bad. It was just. And I'm so glad that I tried it without the waiter there with us, because otherwise, dude, it would
be like
he was
stupid American.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I'm old enough to where it's like, okay, dude, like you can have some, and
Yeah.
you should be fine, even by American standards. It was not good.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even like a significant portion. It was just a little taste test.
Yeah, exactly.
And just nope.
Yeah. Another controversial take I'll throw out there is I think that American church needs a big adjustment in terms of how they approach discipleship. I think so. I'll just lay it out there. Most churches that I've gone to put an emphasis on how many people we baptized this year, how many people were saved either online or in person. I went to a church in not in this area. I don't want to give too many specifics, but they would have an altar call almost every Sunday, and then everyone who came down to the front would be ushered away into a room, kind of a side door, and they'd be prayed over, and they would be given a bunch of material, and I think a Bible, and then they'd be basically sent out on their way. And my question is, okay, well, conversion is great, but there's a parable about seeds getting thrown to different landscaping, and and the one that has good soil will actually grow. Well, what determines good soil? One is a truly repentant heart, but the other is a lot of coaching, like nurturing. Yeah. I would not be where I am today without a bunch of different mentors and older, wiser men telling me what's what and telling me when I'm stupid, or giving me insight into things that they think would be smart. And so if we're just counting conversion numbers, the church is failing. And so I think the corporate church vibe that we have in America is a little bit detrimental. We need to be more focused on relationship building through discipleship groups, through discipleship classes, which some churches do and do very well, and other churches don't even have at all. So the small group is where you will grow as a Christian, and it's not by going to church every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Going to church every Sunday is a tradition that we have from Jewish synagogues, which would go on the Sabbath. And that's
Which
great.
is kind of funny because Sunday is not the Sabbath.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that tradition of going on to church on Sunday is great. And I think it's necessary. But I think if you really want to grow as a Christian, you can't just raise your hand, get saved, and then maybe get baptized and then call yourself a Christian. You really need a lot more discipleship on that, especially if you've gone through traumatic experiences or have a rough growing up, or, you didn't go to church growing up. Actually, in fact, I would say if you did go to church growing up, you probably need the small group even more, because it's, all the right answers and no one's going to call you out except in that small group. So um, that's another, I guess, relatively controversial take, is that the American church needs a very big remodeling job on their structure and how they do things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a yeah, it's there's a significant lack of quality instead of, we're very much focused on quantity. So, in that case, how do you foresee, how would one get started on their journey towards a mentor?
Getting a mentor, getting
Yeah.
a small group or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not hard. Ask. Um, if you're going to a church that offers discipleship groups, that's the first thing. The church has to offer it. I would get plugged in that way. I think before that, though, if I can maybe back up, if you're a new Christian, I think the first thing you need to do is find the right church, which is really hard to do if you don't know anything about different denominations or different churches. And so a couple guidelines I have, and
Are
this
they
is
teaching the Bible?
yeah. This is largely kind of inherited from my parents and a few other mentors that I've listened to over the years. The first would be, well, okay, so there's generally three things that every church has, right? It's that they kind of focus around, I guess. One is the people in the congregation, so the fellowship, the friendships that you're going to build there, the opportunities to be discipled from those people, because a church is just a bunch of people meeting all the time. The second is,
gotta love our flawed hypocrites.
Right. And that's the other thing. Yeah, that's a good point, because church is basically a hospital for a bunch of sick and broken people.
Yeah.
It's not a place where a bunch of people are perfect. So if you're going to a church where everyone's acting better than you, that might be a sign that it's, time to leave.
Yeah.
The second thing is worship. And this is largely, I think, probably a preference for people. Some people prefer hymns. Some people prefer concerts. And it largely depends on which church you go to and who the worship director is and everything else.
Which worship is a whole other conversation that I was having with our mutual friend.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of great churches that do worship really well. Some churches I've been a part of have chosen to not sing specific songs because they don't like the group that they come from.
Yeah.
Or the artist that they come from, which is kind of interesting. I don't have strong opinions one way or the other, but yeah, if the song is definitely not based in biblical truth, it might be worth reevaluating. And as a person who's just going to church, you can't really do a lot with the music. You can't influence that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of have to choose whether or not you'd go along with it. And then the last thing is the teaching. And this is going to be a combination of the pastor style of speaking, whether or not it's a calm TED Talk or a fire and brimstone, hellfire pastor who's yelling. So kind of depends on your personal taste. But it also depends on what they're preaching. And if they're preaching and teaching what the Bible says, I think that's a much stronger church to be a part of than a church that's more topical
Mm-hmm.
And topical meaning that we're going to talk about greed one week, and then we're going to talk about something else a different week, and then it's kind of depending on whatever the pastor wants, and that might be fine, but some churches really take that to the extreme and then never teach the Bible, and the pastor might not even read the Bible.
So are you a bit more of on? Are you more on the opinion that you should go more chronologically through the Bible as opposed to more sporadically?
I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. I grew up kind of going through the Bible chronologically, which in hindsight is extremely boring. Maybe not boring. Boring's not the wrong word. It's mundane sometimes because you've been going through Lamentations for the last 5 months, and it'd be great to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So, as someone who's gone to a church like that, it's nice when you jump around a little bit. The verse by verse is a very popular way of doing that, like that chronological way, and that's fine. But again, I just sometimes you can just read the text and it's self-explanatory.
Yeah.
So I think when a pastor can read through, a section of scripture, and then maybe pull out the 3 things that are going to be contentious.
It's always 3.
Right, yeah, 3 or 5 or whatever the number is, highlight the more contentious things, or just like what Grace Bible does is usually pull out more like the lessons. I feel like I don't think we really highlight a certain number of highlights. It's more
unless we're doing announcements.
Right, yeah. So yeah, I guess that's how I've approached church hunting, church shopping, as we like to say, and yeah, and how you choose your church. I think the most important out of all those is, are they teaching the Bible or not? That kind of is the deal breaker for me. Everything else, it's really preference. So
yeah.
So going back to your question on like how to choose a mentor, once you find that right church, I've always just kind of taken not like a conscious formal, like I don't do this formally, but just take a quick inventory of like, who are all the guys that I know and how many of them are where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then who would I get along with in meeting with on a semi-frequent basis. And then just ask the guys. Most older guys are more than willing to disciple younger men in a good church. In a good church, I've never had a problem with that. I went to this church in San Diego, and first time walking into the men's group night, it was like their men's Bible study, and it's several hundred guys, and like first night they're like, "You're with us," like 2 guys just came over and they're like, "You're with us tonight," and I was like, "How do you determine that?" And they're like, "Are you new? And if you're new, then you're with us. We're discipling you tonight," and then after that, it just they kind of place you, and so I think most older guys have a lot to share, and they want to share with younger guys.
Yeah.
They just don't want to come across as preachy, and so if you ask for their opinion, they're more than willing to give it. So as we saw in our men's conference, they were like literally having people stand up.
Wait, what?
At the end, they had like a bunch of the leaders stand up. They're like, "This is your table leader. Like,
oh yeah.
Feel free to go back to them." Yeah.
Well, cool. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I think this one was much more concise and
than our initial recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those listening, we recorded another episode. What? Maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks
Something
ago?
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And 1, there was some audio trouble, but for 2, the original episode was so sporadic and there was so many just random tangents that
We definitely
did-
went from like 15 topics down to like a handful on this one.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. It was good.
yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was good. We'll definitely do this again. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. That's it.
Wait.
Hey, thanks for joining me all the way through. In the next episode, I will talk to a new friend of mine by the name of Matt Carroll, where we discuss creativity, music, literature, paralysis, language, and much more. Hope you would join us for that as well.